Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Miret Mabouk. I am the director of the Egypt program at the Middle East Institute. We are lucky this morning to have two great guests, and to paraphrase someone else, my first guest needs no introduction. Dr. Alaa Al Aswany is one of the most celebrated authors in the Arab world. However, he may be one of the most celebrated authors in the Arab world, but his work has been translated in over 37 languages. And he makes an impact in every one of those 37 languages because of the way he writes. Dr. Al Aswany has an incisive understanding of human nature. It manages to be both exploratory, or not both, it manages to be exploratory, condemnatory, and compassionate about his characters all at the same time. More importantly, he manages to take that understanding of human nature and place it in the economic, political, and social contexts of the society that he writes about so lovingly and so pitilessly, and with such devotion and compassion. Like his late great forebears, like Naguib Mahfouz, like Yusuf Idris, Yahya Ha'i, Tawfiq al-Hakim, he is quite simply an excellent storyteller. We're also lucky to have with us Ms. Vivian Salama, who is not only an extremely respected journalist, she's an author in her own right, having managed to find time somewhere in the middle of all that hard-hitting journalism to write her own children's books on children and refugees. So thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to an excellent discussion, and I will now turn it over to Vivian.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with the Middle East Institute with my very old friend, Miret Mabouk, and of course with Dr. Alaa Al Aswany, who I, for the first time, interviewed in 2005 and have not seen since. So it's great to connect with you. Dr. Alaa, as many of you out there may know, is also a practicing dentist. Is his day job when he's not writing books, but he assures me that I don't have to go by the traditional titles of Dr. Alaa, and I can just call him Alaa. So Alaa, it's so great to be with you.
Thank you very much, Vivian, and thank you for Merit for this wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. And I must thank everybody who made this event possible, and thank you for the invitation.
Perfect, excellent. So we are talking about your latest book, one of many that you've written, The Dictator Syndrome. I've got my copy right here. And true to form, for those who have not read it, true to form, Dr. Alaa is pushing boundaries in this one as well. It's a provocative read, definitely going to, trigger a lot of emotions and questions and perhaps even controversy, which he smiles once he hears that because he likes that, I think, a little bit too. And so I want to dive right in and talk to you, Dr. Alaa, about the book. Just give us an overview before we get into details. What are we talking about in this book? Why did you write it?
Well, in the first place, I'm a novelist, as you know, and then what happened is that one of my publishers in the UK proposed a project, a long interview, and this happened with some other novelists. And she proposed, she's a very good friend, Barbara Woodbrick, and she told me, we would like to make an interview with you, a long interview, and I will publish it. And I said, very good. And I began to, we made like 3 or 4 sessions with the interview. And I realized at some point that I'm getting to very, very interesting territories, very interesting ideas. Accordingly, I told my dear friend Barbara, listen, I think that I'm going to work on this topic to make a book. And she was happy with this. And of course, I kept working for 1 year on this topic, not to make just an interview, but to try to find really the basic idea of the whole thing. And it was published in the UK, and it was published in France, Italy, and some other countries. And the idea is, I believe personally, as a novelist, that our main problem in the Arab world is dictatorship. And probably you know, I'm a dentist, so I had a medical education. In medicine, you should understand clearly what is the disease and what are the symptoms. You don't have to mix up those things together. Otherwise, you could kill the patient. You know, when somebody has fever, this is not the disease. You should find the disease. And in surgery, there is a wonderful rule: remove the cause. You see? So I believe that all the problems of the Arab world, all the problems that have kept us behind, simply is the dictatorship. And everything else are symptoms. And of course, I don't know if but I'm going to use medical terms, you know, I did use those medical terms in my book. In medicine, we have a difference. We must differentiate between the disease and the symptom. The symptom is when you have the disease, and the syndrome, I'm sorry. When you have symptoms that are repeated every time together, and then this will be a syndrome. So I wrote the Dictatorship Syndrome because I realized that the syndrome has symptoms that have been repeated over and over and over.
In fact, here on page 11 of your book, you start to describe, it might be suggested that the people ruled by a dictator can be compared to those suffering from mental illness. Not only do they need liberty to strive for it, but they cannot imagine a life without the dictator whom they protect and whose will they embody. So that's very controversial. It's quite an early statement that you make in your book, because you describe it almost as a dependence, as an addiction. But in your own country, in my ancestral country, in Egypt, people rose up against a dictator 10 years ago and pushed back against it. And so how do you distinguish between having a mental illness or having a disease and the realization of it? I mean, to use your words, obviously, and then the realization of it where you have people in the streets protesting and saying, we don't want this.
Very good.
Where's
Thank you
the fine line?
Thank you very much for the question, because it's very interesting. Well, this idea is not mine. This idea is an idea of a very important sociologue, French sociologue called Etienne de la Boissy, and he lived in the 16th century, and he wrote one single book because, unfortunately, he died very early at the age of 30 years old. He died. The book is called Le Discours de la Servitude Volontaire in French. You could translate this, the discourse of voluntary servitude. And his assumption, and I wrote about him in the book, and his assumption is very clear. He said that the dictator is one single person, and nobody is capable to impose his will on millions of people unless those millions of people are prepared somehow to accept the idea of the dictatorship. And I gave many examples, you know, why Hitler took power in Germany, why Mussolini took power, why, if you're talking about Egypt, yes, people revolted in Egypt, but we must not forget, and that was one of the mistakes of the revolution, and I am included, I made this mistake, that the people who revolted were not all the Egyptian people. You see, you have like, according to the CNN said that the people who revolted were like between 10 and 20 million Egyptians. I believe this, right? But we are 100 million Egyptians. So you have people who did not revolt for many different reasons, right? And you will be, if you follow, and I'm quite sure you did, if you follow what happened after the revolution, you probably will be, your vision will be very clear about what de la Boissy said, because it's not only in Egypt, you know, it's everywhere where there was a dictator. You find people who got adapted to the dictatorship. From the very beginning, they were willing or prepared or waiting for somebody to protect them. And then after the dictatorship, they regret. They do regret. That was happened when Stalin experienced, Salazar experienced in Portugal, Franco experienced in Spain. I wrote this in the book. Mm-hmm. There is some dependence psychologically. You were born, and this is the case of many Egyptians, you were born, raised, and you made your career, and the elections were rigged all the time, and you had only one dictator, and you used to live protected by this dictator. So at some point, when some people revolt and this dictator will step down, and then you don't feel secure anymore, you see. And this is a big problem, but it's very human. I can understand. Of course, I don't agree with, but I can understand.
Before we continue, we have a couple of hundred viewers joining us today, and we're really happy to have you all. We can't see you, but we want to hear from you. So please don't forget, if you want to ask questions to Dr. Alaa, there's the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom. I'm still trying to figure out Zoom 14 months in, but there's the Q&A there. Send me your questions and I'll share them with Alaa, and we'll try to get as many of them in as possible. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So Alaa, you start your book out talking about being a young boy in Nasser's Egypt, in Gamal Abdel Nasser's Egypt. And of course, for those who don't follow Egyptian history as closely, Gamal Abdel Nasser is, on the one hand, a very beloved figure in Egyptian history because he was very charismatic and he was part of the group that forced the colonial rulers of Egypt out and things like that. And so there is that side of it, but there's also the controversial side of the fact that he also dominated power with a heavy hand. And Dr. Alaa, you really describe sort of your growing into this awareness of Nasser as what you described to be a dictator, and you know that's when you first started to realize sort of the earliest memories you have of this dictator syndrome, as you call it. Can you talk a little bit about what you experienced as a boy, how you describe it in the book, and how it informed your own views of today? You talk a lot about your father in that portion of the book too, and so share a little bit with our listeners about that.
Well, my father was a leftist, socialist activist, and he was a lawyer and writer, and he was a famous writer in Egypt, and I was his only kid, so I was very close to him. And of course, I began the book was in 1967, because I still believe that this is a very significant moment, and it's very important moment to understand the dictatorship syndrome. Why? Because I was a kid. Everybody in Egypt was positive, quite sure that we will win the war. Do you believe that in the Egyptian newspapers there was a debate? I'm quite sure you're familiar with Kulthum, right?
Of course.
Kulthum, anybody? There was a debate if Kulthum must sing in Jerusalem, after the war every month, or she should wait after the victory, right?
For those of you who aren't, by the way, familiar with Kulthum, she was probably the most famous singer in the Arab world. I mean, to this day, probably, but she was an Egyptian and also used to sing a lot of nationalistic songs in those days and things like that. So please continue, Dr.
Oh, people were, and I was scared. Even my father, who was anti-Nasser, he was against Nasser, as a dictator, but he was quite sure. Everybody was quite sure. This is our war. We will win, right? And they kept lying to the Egyptian people for 2 days. They said that we won. They said everything is, and then on the 3rd day, because Nasser regime was writing a demand to the United Nations to stop the war, right? And then we had to know. And that was unbelievable shock. And this is how a dictator, where a dictator could lead, his nation, his people. And Nasser is a very good example. Why? Because he was really loved by millions of Arabs. Second, he was genuine. He was not corrupt. So the problem was not with Nasser. The problem was with the dictatorship, with the system. Any dictator will lead us to this catastrophe.
How do you feel that colonialism influenced that? Because a lot of people would say this was something that was sort of built into the system due to colonialism, and it happens in so many countries that break free of colonialism. Do you think there is a link?
Well, I must tell you a little, just a story that happened to me. I was invited as a writer in some Arab country, and I found, and this country has oil. I'm not going to mention the country, but has oil, right? So they should be rich. And I found people in a miserable, situation. And I asked the Minister of Culture why people are that poor while, you have oil. You're a rich country, which is not the case of Egypt. And she said, you cannot imagine what the French colonialism did to us, right? And I said, fine. You got your independence 40 years ago. 40 years, 40 ago. I think you had enough time, to do anything. So the idea of colonialism has been used the same way the idea of the Israeli-Arab conflict, right, has been used over and over and over by the Arab dictators to justify everything. Fine, the colonialism was terrible, but Egypt had its independence 1954. There was a coup d'etat in 1952, and then 1954, there was no more British occupation in Egypt. So we had the time to improve the situation in our country. And if we haven't done that, it means that there is a problem in the system. I cannot blame the colonialism forever, you see.
So one of the things that you captured very beautifully in probably your most famous book, Amarat Yacobian, the Jacobian Building, for those who haven't read it, it's phenomenal. That's when when you wrote that, that's when I first met you. It's been made into a film and into a television series, and you capture the different socioeconomic situations in Egypt very beautifully in this one building, where you have people who are struggling, people who are not. It's very controversial because you really paint a very realistic picture, including, people's sexuality and things like that, that you really kind of tap into. And there's some taboo topics in the book that were really very, very very interesting portrayal. So tell me how that, Egypt is predominantly a poor country right now. Most of the people are living below the poverty line, but you also have wealthy people and everything in between. The country itself has great resources. How does that play into sort of people's views of their ruler? When you have someone like Nasser, and you talk about socialism in the book. He was obviously trying to provide some of the resources of the country to the poorer residents of the country. You grew up in a section of Cairo where your family was on the wealthier side, or at least you don't describe it, but let's say upper middle class to upper class. So how do you think that shaped your views? Because you are part of the minority when it comes to socioeconomic upbringing. And so many other people do not have the resources that you grew up with. And so their views of the leader or what the leader should be doing are very different. And I'm going to talk about religion in a minute, but just let's stick to the socioeconomic for a moment.
That's a very good question, as usual. Thank you, Vivian. Well, my father used to work on this. Yes, I come from the upper middle class. My father comes from a big family in the south. My mother came from an aristocratic family. Her uncle was the minister of education in the last. Please remember this. In the last free elections in Egypt, 1950, right? So my father, because he was an artist. And he used to tell me when I was a kid, listen, I don't want you to live in a bubble, right? Because I was, Egypt, right? I was in au lycée français du Caire. I was in a Gezira club, and he told me, you should understand Egypt. This is not Egypt. This is the lucky Egypt. This is the top of the pyramid, And then he used to bring me, to take me with him to his comrades, in the very poor neighborhoods of Cairo. So I had to have friends over there, and so it was. My father was very much concerned about myself, not to be the son of the elites, and I can claim that I was never the son of this elite social class. I know the people, I understand the people, I have many friends everywhere, and even my social class, many of them, because of the revolution, they are against me now, because I didn't. They feel that I betrayed the social class we belong to. And of course I didn't betray, but I believe that you should belong to humanity. You don't have to belong to your own interests. And I never did that.
I want to touch upon one more. We're starting to get some great questions, and everyone, I see them, and I'm going to get to them momentarily, but very important. We're obviously, it's 2021. I had to stop there for a second. Thank you, COVID, for completely eliminating my concept of time. It is 2021. We are 10 years from the anniversary of the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. You mentioned earlier asking me if I had witnessed it. I was there for the revolution. I was there for the couple of years after the revolution to cover it as well. So I do have a very keen sense of what Egypt went through in those years, and the feelings of elatedness, which you share, that you were excited. You were in Tahrir Square for the revolution, but also sort of everything that came after that. And so I want to get us to the contemporary issues of you were a supporter of the revolution, but you are also concerned about the current president, President Sisi, who was a top general who moved into power through the military. But you've also made some controversial statements about what happened in Rabaa Square in 2013 with regard to supporters of the Muslim Brotherhood who were angry about the ouster of President Morsi of Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood aligned president. And so I want to ask you, you know, how do you, on the one hand, you know, what would you say to people who don't understand? On the one hand, you're criticizing the dictators for their heavy-handedness and their domination of Egypt, but on the other hand, you are open to a crackdown as brutal as the one in Rabaa, where you had Human Rights Watch said over 900 people may have been killed in that massacre in Cairo. How do you distinguish? Like, is that not the action of a dictator also to take such brutal action, or do you feel that there is some? How do you explain your views? Basically, is what I'm trying to say. To
yeah, I did.
Who find them controversial?
I did many times, but the problem is I have been attacked by both sides. I'm always attacked by the Sisi supporters and the Islamists at the same time, and I was even physically attacked by the Islamists twice. Once in Paris, while I was presenting a novel, and it was not a political event, and they attacked my own clinic, you know, in Garden City in Egypt. So the problem is, since 1952, we have been, as Egyptians, besieged, confined between two fascist forces, the Islamists and the army, you know, and this is a problem. And when you have a fascist mindset, you cannot understand that people are against you and against the other side. This is beyond your ability. So the Sisi supporters feel that anybody who is against the Sisi is Muslim Brothers, right? And the Muslim Brothers think that anybody who is against the Muslim Brothers is supporting Sisi, right? The idea is that those are, to me, and I wrote that in the book, two aspects of our problem. I have in French, which wasn't translated in English, hasn't been translated yet, a book with this title, you know, Military Dictatorship and Islamic Extremism, two aspects, I'm translating, two aspects of our misery, you know. So this is the problem. So I'm talking, this is the main idea. I will.
And you talk a lot about religion in the book as it relates, which is why I was using a real example.
I want just to clarify my position.
Please.
I have been defending democracy now for 40 years in Egypt. Accordingly, I have been against all the rulers who happened to be in power because nobody was democratic, right? The idea is that Mr. Sisi made a coup d'etat and then he overthrew the first Egyptian freely elected ruler. It's a myth. This is not true, right? At all. The first elected ruler in Egypt in the modern history is Saad Zaghloul, 1924, right? The last free elections in Egypt was 1950, January 19, before that. The army, not only the Egyptian army, any army doesn't make free elections. What happened is that the army Mubarak was shocked by the revolution. So he made an alliance with the Muslim Brothers, and everybody who lived in Egypt understands what would understand what I'm saying, right? So what happened in the parliament and the presidency is that Mr. Morsi was appointed by the army, and there was no free election. And the Muslim Brothers used to buy the votes of the poor people. If you call this democracy, I disagree with you, right? What happened is the army took over, right? But Morsi was not an elected president to me, and I think to the majority of Egyptians. What happened is this: there were millions of people asking for early presidential elections. Why? Nobody talks about that. Why? Because Morsi made a decree through which he became a kind of Ottoman sultan, right? Because he made his decisions above the law. So we wanted early presidential elections. Of course, an Islamist will tell me, are you happy now with the Sisi? Of course I'm not. That's why I cannot go home, right? But the fact that it was a coup d'etat against an elected president, this is not true. And you cannot imagine, and nobody reasonable could imagine, that the military council, the military council took over after the Mubarak stepped down, then the military council took over. And the military council massacred the revolutionary youth many times. Mohammed Mahmoud, they ran over the youth with armored vehicles in Maspero, as you know. Do you believe that this military council could organize free elections? Are we kidding? And for Rabah, this is the last point, for Rabah, please get back to Amnesty International report, August 2nd. And this report is very important and nobody talks about it. And it is with the title, Torture and Killing in the Morsi supporters sit-ins, with the names. It's not my report, it's Amnesty report, right? I didn't ask, and nobody asked for any massacre. I said those sit-ins, which were not peaceful, should be evacuated. That's what I wrote. Within the law, right? I said that on Twitter. The tweet still, I mean, you can find it easily. Yeah? Right. Within the law, I said within the law. The idea that Mr. Sisi decided to make a massacre, this is his responsibility, and I have been against this all the time. You see, so the problem is with the
clarification.
The Islamists are all the time. Anybody who is against them, he is pro-Sisi, and the Sisi supporters do the same thing. And I'm not surprised because they are both, they have both fascist mindsets.
Obviously, they're all very controversial and hot topics, but I want to sit back and let all of you ask questions. So Dr. Alaa, we're going to get through these as quickly as possible because we've got many questions coming in. First from Erica Biagini. I hope I pronounced that right, Erica. Dr. Alaa, do you see a way out of this dictator syndrome in Egypt and the Arab world? And if so, what is the way out?
Well, thank you very much, but probably you're overestimating my ability. I'm not ruling the Arab world, but I try to understand what's happening. And we have problems. We really have problems, Sorry. I have a weekly video. I make a weekly video in Arabic to try to understand, to try to explain that our way of thinking is the problem. It's not the dictators, of course, are the problem, but for example, try to criticize anything, any, I would say, crime by a ruler of the Gulf states. Try to do that. I did that many times. Yeah? And then what will happen? You will have people who are citizens of this state attacking you and insulting you and telling you, you don't have to say this about our father. And you have people now in Egypt who think, as you know, Mr. Sisi gave 2 islands to the Saudis, and they are Egyptian islands. And you have many people who say, fine, if he thinks this is fine, we'll support it. So the idea, the problem is here. You see, it's not, Sisi is just a symptom of the disease. The disease is our way of thinking. Accordingly, I cannot say that it will take time or probably it will happen tomorrow. But as soon as people will be capable to see the facts, you see, I think we will have democracy. But the problem is to have the fact. We have 2 delusional visions. One of them is the pro-Sisi, and the second is the Islamist. This is a problem, and I explained in the book the difference between Muslim and Islam. You see, I don't know if it's useful to explain. Yes, the Muslim is somebody with a religion, the same way as a Hindu or Christian or a Jew or whatever. You know, he tries through the values of his religion to be in good terms with God and with the people. The Islamist is something different. And here, the Islamists, they have the same ideology beginning from ISIS till the Muslim Brothers. No difference. The difference is in the tactics. ISIS is making the war, and ISIS people say that we're not going to participate to democracy. And the Muslim Brothers say, no, we will participate in democracy so that we could rule. But the ideology is the same. The problem with Islamists is that they live in a virtual world. They believe that they should conquer the whole non-Muslim world. They believe in Khilafah, and this Khilafah never existed. Accordingly, it's almost impossible for them to see the facts. Mm-hmm. And the people, the supporters of Sisi are in the same, situation.
Just briefly, because I want to get to the other questions, but you talk a lot about conspiracy theories in the book. So what do you say then to those who believe that these rulers like Sisi, like Mubarak, and everyone before them, that they're protecting the country? You're talking about the Islamists versus Muslims. To an extent, President Sisi has said that he's protecting Egypt with some of his heavy-handed tactics, and he has convinced a good number of Egyptians that is the case. That if he leaves, the country is vulnerable. So what do you say to those who feel?
I mean, this is the narrative of all the dictators. Mussolini was claimed that he's protecting Italy. Hitler is the same. The country doesn't need anybody to protect the country. The people should protect the country. Mm-hmm. Who protects America? Who protects the UK? The people protect through the parliament. So the idea that we are, because just think about what is omitted in this sentence. He protects us. It means that we are not able to protect ourselves. Is that he is our father and we are kids. And he knows what we don't know. And he decides for us what is good and what is bad. This is the logic of a dictatorship. And it doesn't work because this guy who is claiming he's protecting the country, Nasser said the same thing, will lead you to the most catastrophic situation, because he will decide for himself. One, two, because his main motivation is to stay in power. The difference between what is Mr. Biden is doing now in America and what Sisi is doing is not a personal difference, it's the system. Biden is trying to prove for everybody that he is working for the good of everybody, right? And Sisi doesn't care. It's Sisi or any other dictator. What is important for him is to keep the power, no matter what, you see? So the idea is that in the Arab world, what is dramatic, the tragedy, is that it seems to me, unfortunately, that many Arabs, I'm not saying the majority, I'm Arab, I'm very proud to be Arab, but many Arabs either don't read history or don't learn from history. How many times should we have a defeat like 1967 to understand that the dictatorship will lead us to a catastrophe, no matter what? How many times should we have a defeat like this to learn?
One would argue that it's not just Arabs who struggle to learn from history, a lot of others too. Let's try to plow through some of these questions, Dr. Alaa, so work with me, so we'll go quickly a little bit. Mohammed Salim asks, do you feel that we Egyptians, Mohammed is Egyptian, identified as Egyptian, and it should admit that we were taken for a ride or cheated after the revolution? Do you think there's any change in Egypt in the future has to come through a coup, since the army is in charge right now?
No, a coup as a term should be done against an established democracy, right? So it will be a conflict, or if there will be a coup tomorrow, then somebody will take power. A coup, and you should say a coup detat, a coup, which is a French term, as you know. A coup detat means that there was an established democracy, and all of a sudden the army took over, and the army will get rid of the elected people, right? Very good example, what happened in Chile with Salvador Allende. That was a coup d'etat, right? In Egypt, it wasn't coup d'etat because, as I told you, I mean, it was not free elections, and there was an alliance between the brothers and the army, and, So, I don't believe that a coup d'etat would make any good anywhere, anytime. I believe our problem is the consciousness. When people understand that nobody will protect them, that they should protect themselves, right? To simplify this, we get back to our daily life, my daughter, I could decide for her all the time. No, why do you, no, you should apply to Princeton instead of applying to whatever what. Why do you want to study music, right? You should study medicine. If I do that, I love my daughter, of course, but I will ruin her personality, right? She must say, no, Dad, I respect your opinion, right? But I would love to study music. The people should do that.
I'll move on to Ashraf Fahim, if you're the Ashraf Fahim I know. Hello, Ashraf. There's been a rise in populist movements around the world. Bolsonaro, Trump, Duterte are the three recent examples. If this phenomenon is so widespread, then why do you single out Egypt and the Arab world as being different, or specifically predisposed to accepting authoritarian figures? To be fair, he does talk about other areas, parts of the world in the book for sure, but I'll let you answer that question.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Ashraf. If you read the book, I think you will find the answer. But anyway, I believe that it's still existing as a threat, even in a democracy. As you said, the populist discourse. And the populist discourse has been very effective. I don't have the habit to blame other people all the time without blaming ourselves. If you can imagine the world without the Islamic extremists, I think the populist movement would have been much weaker. The idea is that people don't have time to read, to understand. I'm talking about the Westerns, right? They don't have time. They are fighting, struggling, to put the food on the table and to pay the bills. They don't have time to read the difference between Muslims and Islams, right? So if they find every week somebody who is willing to kill Westerns because they are against Islam, and then they will find somebody else telling them, I will protect you, of course they will vote for him. So we are to blame too as Arabs and Muslims, you see. It's not only the populist movement, but I hope that you will find the answer in my book. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joshua. I think that was probably also answered for because you had a similar question. So I'm gonna move on. Eloa dos Santos Prado says, Dr. Alaa, Mabruk. She writes, could you discuss what explains the authoritarian resilience, and if associated with medical terms, is there any forecast for metastasis?
I don't understand the question. What the yes.
She's wondering if you can, what makes an authoritarian so resilient to, let's say, a revolution, or, what we've seen in Egypt of, you're saying that dictators have survived, even popular movements in the street and uprisings in the street. Why do they last for so long? Sometimes 20, 30 years. And is there a risk for spreading?
No, because the people didn't understand what the revolution wanted, or they were not able to pay the price. When I say I pay the price, of course I paid the price for 5 years, or at least I was banned in my country, I cannot go home, and so, and I'm fine with that. Of course I'm fine with that, no problem. I would have done this over and over, but you have people, my colleagues and comrades, who paid more. People who like Ahmed Harara, if somebody would know who is Ahmed Harara lost his eyes as a young dentist, revolutionary, and many people were killed. But the rest of the people didn't understand enough what was going on. And I'm not blaming them. Mm-hmm. They are the product, their consciousness is the product of 70 years of the military dictatorship. So of course, they don't understand. Accordingly, the moment we will understand that nobody will ever protect us, we'll protect ourselves. We don't have to worship the leader. If you worship God. If you don't, it's okay, right? But at this moment, this will be the start of our future. Mm-hmm. Anything else is just a waste of energy and time.
Eloa asks an interesting follow-up. She says, do you believe that there can be harmony between genuine political Islam and democracy?
Thank you very much. What do you mean genuine political Islam? I don't believe the political. If you say genuine Islam, I would say yes. Because before the political Islam, the Egyptian people were Muslims. They were not Hindu, But the political Islam, no, I don't believe that the political Islam could be adapted to any democratic system. That's what I believe. Why? Because in a democracy, we're talking about ideas, right? My idea could be wrong. Your idea could be better. But with political Islam, I do represent God. When I represent God, who are you to disagree with me? You see? And the Muslim brothers call themselves the Jama'a Rabbaniya, the association of God or the group of God. So if you are Jama'a Rabbaniya, if you're the association of God, how can I try to convince you, that your ideas are wrong? So the political Islam is just a complication of the dictatorship. One quick example, the Muslim Brothers were founded in 1928, okay? Till 1952, 1954, when Nasser just canceled the whole democratic system, we have 30 years. No one single member of the Muslim Brothers was elected in the parliament. Never, never. Why? Of course, there was free elections, then there was rigged elections, but I'm talking about the free elections. Why? Why? Because there was freedom. So you had the Wafd, the most important liberal political party. So the problem is, I don't know if there is a bacteria called in medicine anaerobic. What is anaerobic is that without oxygen, this bacteria will grow and will become much more, much stronger, right? So the Islamist extremism is anaerobic bacteria. And the democracy is the oxygen. Every time you give oxygen, then you finish this. So I am for the oxygen, of course.
We have a few more minutes, so I want to get to a couple more questions. Haneen Abu Nil asks, how do you identify the difference between the mindset of loving dictators, or is it a coming from brainwashing dictatorship strategies, or actual ignorance? I have to admit, Haneen, I'm not quite clear on your question. Maybe if you can clarify it, but I'll read it exactly. How do you identify the difference between the mindset of loving dictators coming from brainwashing dictatorship strategies or actual ignorance of the alternatives? Do you?
I answered this in the book, because could you tell me one, Winston Churchill led not only the UK, they not Great Britain, they led the whole free world to win in the Second World War, right? And the day, and you could hear this because there is no video, you will hear it, when he announced that the German, that Hitler announced that he will surrender, right? And then he said to the English people, millions, this is your victory. And the English audience responded by saying, yours, it's your victory. What a feeling, very good. 3 weeks later, he went he presented himself in the elections, and he lost. So the people who were shouting and chanting, yours, they didn't vote for him because they believed that he's a national hero. This is true. But we need somebody else, after the war. We don't have this mind in the Arab world. As soon as we will have this mind, we will have democracy. Mubarak is a terribly corrupt ruler, But what happened is that he joined the army, or he was responsible or whatever in the October War. And then up to now, if you criticize him, you'll find people say, no, 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 no. He's a hero, right? In the October War. But this didn't happen with the English people. Why? Because they don't worship their leaders. This is our problem.
It seems, Hennin, that he understood it because you clarified, and I think he might have answered it, but she asks a follow-up. How is this narrative of changing mindset productive in a context where channels to change are continuously blocked?
Yeah,
So,
but yeah.
please.
I believe in life, I believe in the people, I believe in history. I read history, and Hennin, if you give more time to read history, you will find all the answers. Because you cannot, when I ask you about when the Russian Revolution happened, you will tell me 1917. No, the Russian Revolution began 1825 by a movement called the Decembrist movement, you see? And then there was a counter-revolution, and then there was waves of the revolution. And at some point, they took over, the revolution won. Of course, I'm not discussing what is positive and negative in the Bolshevik revolution. This is not our topic. I'm talking about why I am optimistic, because I read history. If you read history, yes, it could happen. And I never even imagined, I knew that there would be a revolution in Egypt, but I didn't expect the revolution to happen on January 25th. And I said, I was writing my novel, The Automobile Club, and I wake up very early to write. So I said, I'm not going to miss a day of writing for another manifestation, another whatever. I know everybody, manifestation of 400 people. So I finished my work writing, and then I went to the Tahrir Square, and I found tens of thousands of people. And I said, finally, it is today, right? Because I expected that. You never know. I never know.
And I can actually attest to that, because when I met you in 2005, in my article that I wrote, I quoted you at the top that you predicted that there would be a revolution in Egypt, although your prediction was that Hosni Mubarak, the former president, the late now former president, died and his son was going to take power. And the people revolted because of that. And you predicted that very, again, very provocatively in 2005, when we were still many years away from the actual revolution. And so, and I quoted you as saying that, and we both are okay. We managed to make it with that story.
Yeah, this happened. Thank you.
I have so many questions myself that I still didn't get to ask, but unfortunately we're out of time. But you can, of course, pick up your own copies of The Dictator Syndrome, Dr. Alaa Al Aswany. Always great to talk to you. We thank the Middle East Institute
Vivian.
also for hosting us.
Thank you very much. And really, it was very nice and very intelligent, very interesting. And I'm not surprised because I know you, and you made an interview with me a long time ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And thanks to the Middle East Institute and to all of you for the great questions. I'm sorry to those we didn't get to, but please, Dr. Alaa is on Twitter. So if you have any more questions, I'm sure that you can interact with him there as well. So thank you very much. And everyone have a great day or evening wherever you are, and be in touch.